Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadhari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Varadhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya, Jaya Nityananda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Advaita Chandra, Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Jaya Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Gauranitai, 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 Jaya Gauranitai. Jai Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Caritamrta ki Hare Krishna. Good morning everyone. Thank you for coming. So today we thought we'd do something a little bit different. Every weekend, as I understand, you read from Caitanya Caritamrta. Thank you, Boo. Thank you so much. So what I thought we'd do today, I don't need this, you can, this is for your reference. What I thought we'd do today is maybe in 45 minutes, we'll try to give you an overview of the whole Caitanya Caritamrita. Because sometimes it's nice to have the overview, because then whenever you come to read any verse of the Caitanya Caritamrita, then you'll be able to put it in context and understand where it is in the book. And so sometimes having an overview of the book is very nice. Krishna Raj Goswami, he says, Caitanya Caritamrita Nitya Karapan Jaha Hoite Premananda Bhakti Tattva Gyan. He says, brothers, sisters, every day read Caitanya Caritamrita. Jaha Hoite Premananda, you will become very happy, you will become infused with love. Bhakti Tattva Gyan, and you'll understand all the secrets of devotion. The Caitanya Caritamrita is a very, very special book. Of course, we know that Srila Prabhupada, when he came to America and he was on the Jaladuta and he had a very difficult time on the Jaladuta, he was feeling separation from Vrindavan, he was heading to an unknown place, and on the ship itself he was in such bad health. But he writes in his diary that my only solace is in reading Caitanya Caritamrita, in which I am experiencing the nectar of life. And so Srila Prabhupada took Caitanya Caritamrita with him on board the Jaladuta, and he had a great love. He said the Caitanya Caritamrita is the real Bengali sweet. So there are so many Bengali sweets, very nice, but he said CC is the real sweet. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also, it was his favorite book. He said there will be a time in the future when people will learn the Bengali language only so they can read Caitanya Caritamrita. Can you imagine learning a whole language just so you can read a book in that language, even you have it translated? It's not the same. Very sweet. So Caitanya Caritamrita is very, very special, and I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the CC and how it progresses. It's very systematic literature, and then I'll open it up and see whether you may have any questions or comments or thoughts on the Caitanya Caritamrita. So Bhagavad Gita has 700 verses, Srimad Bhagavatam has 18,000, but the Caitanya Caritamrita has 11,500 verses. Yeah, a little bit more than that. Just over 11,500 verses. The verses are written in Bengali by Krishna Raj Goswami. They're all poetic verses. They're written in with amazing literary skill. And of these 11,500 verses, it's said that 850 verses are quoted from other scriptures. So Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he quotes over 50 over 50 other scriptures when he is writing Caitanya Caritamrta. For us, that's not difficult because nowadays we have database. So we can just search up and find anything. But when you're living in Radha Kund and you don't have a computer and you're having to write everything in old age when your memory is generally declining, then to be able to find so many quotes from so many different scriptures clearly means that some divine empowerment is needed. So Krishna Raj Goswami was there in Radha Kund. Many of you may have been. If you go in the middle of Sham Kund and Radha Kund, that passageway goes to the top, and then as you go to the top and you go around the back, then you will see there's a Bhajan Kutir, and it said that is the place where Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami was writing Caitanya Caritamrta. Of course, he had received a dream from Nityananda in which he had been told to go to Vrindavan. Nityananda came to him in a dream and said, Are Hare Krishna Das na karaha bhai Vrindavana yaha taha sarva labhya hai. One night he got a dream and Nityananda said to him, Krishna Das, don't worry about anything. When you wake up in the morning, Vrindavana yaha taha, just go to Vrindavan, sarva labhya hai, there you will get everything. And of course he did get everything. He got the best residence in the entire creation. He got to live at Radha Kund. He got the best association in the entire creation, the association of the Goswamis. And he got the best service you could ever imagine, absorbing himself in the pastimes and writing the Leelas of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami in this way writes the Chaitanya Caritamrta. And the Chaitanya Caritamrta, the 11,500 verses are split into 3 sections. So there's the Adi-Lila, the Madhya and the Antya. Sometimes it's said, it's not strictly like this, but sometimes it's said that these Leelas are split in the sense that the Adi-Lila focuses on Sambandha, which means our relationship or knowledge of our relationship with Krishna. The Madhya-Lila focuses on Abhidaya, or how one should practice spiritual life. And the Antya-Lila focuses on Prayojana, or the ultimate goal, the ultimate fruit of spiritual life. If you look at every single scripture, they practically all contain these 3 divisions of subject matter. And so Chaitanya Caritamrta, we can say broadly, is split up in this way. Within each Leela of Chaitanya Caritamrta, you can see that there are basically about 4 sections. So there are, you can say broadly, 12 main sections within the Chaitanya Caritamrta. The CC in the Adi Leela, devotees often open it and they think, okay, the real Bengali suite, very nice, many pastimes. And then they just realize that the beginning of Chaitanya Caritamrta is all philosophy. Because chapters number 1 to 12 of the Adi Leela are all to do with an invocation. So before you can even relish the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you must understand the truth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In Sanskrit we say, before you can understand rasa, or before you can understand Leela, you must understand tattva. That is the foundation. Otherwise, you will not. One person came to Prabhupada and said, I want to make a movie on the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada said, first make a movie on the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam. And he said, okay, and then can we do it? And then Prabhupada said, make a movie on the 2nd canto. Can you imagine making a movie on the evolution of the material elements and all this kind of stuff? He gave up. He said, no, I won't do it. So we must understand tattva, then we can understand Leela. So what Kaviraj Goswami does in the first 13 chapters is, 12 chapters, is he does an invocation. He basically explains, number 1, who is Mahaprabhu? Number 2, why does Mahaprabhu come to this world? What is the external and internal reason? Number 3, who are the main associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Panchatattva, and what is their identity? Number 4, he explains, how did I come about to write this literature? What were the events leading up to me writing Caitanya Caritamrta? And the 5th thing he establishes in the invocation is who are the all the family of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhakti Kalpataru, this is called, the tree of devotion. So all of this is described in the first 12 chapters of the Caitanya Caritamrta, and this lays the foundation. So now all of this has been described, now we can begin talking about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So different devotees have written books just on these invocation chapters because they're very, very deep in their philosophy. So then, after Kaviraj Goswami has done the invocation, then in chapters 13 and 14, what he does is he describes the incarnation, how Mahaprabhu is born. We hear about that story of how there was a full moon and a Purnima, sorry, an eclipse, and on that day when everyone was chanting in the evening time, then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared. It's an amazing story actually. We were just in New Mayapur, and I don't know how many of you know this story, but Prabhupada created New Mayapur, and at one point they were bringing Gaur Nitai to New Mayapur. But what happened is when Gaur Nitai were being shipped into France, they arrived in France, but they were held at the port. So Gaur Nitai were in a box, and they were waiting to come to New Mayapur, but they were held. 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by. The devotees didn't know when Gaur Nitai would be released. Anyway, finally they got a call one day that, okay, the papers have been released and Gaur Nitai can come. And so Gaur Nitai were driving in to New Mayapur on a truck, and it said that on the evening that Gaur Nitai arrived in New Mayapur, it was an eclipse. Can you imagine? That is our New Mayapur that Prabhupada created. So Mahaprabhu appears when there is a full moon eclipse like this. And so in these chapters we hear all about how Mahaprabhu incarnates in this world. Kaviraj Goswami and Srila Prabhupada in his purports explain and give all the different scriptural references to establish that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not just verified by scripture, but also verified by astrology. So then we hear about how Nilamba Chakravarti does Mahaprabhu's astrology, Nimai's astrology, and practically nearly faints because he understands the identity of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then in this way, Mahaprabhu incarnates himself in this world. So we hear this pastime in these 2 chapters. And then in the next 2 chapters, chapters number 15 and 16 of the Adi Lila, what's happening is we're hearing about the education of Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu becomes a scholar, Nimai Pandit. He learns all grammar, he learns all logic, he learns all arguments to defeat anyone. One of his childhood friends is Murari Gupta, and oftentimes they're debating. Finally it comes to the point where Murari Gupta is so scared to debate with Mahaprabhu that whenever he sees Mahaprabhu he crosses the road. They have a debate and he defeats Murari Gupta, and then he says, okay, now let's switch sides. And you would think Murari Gupta's heard all the arguments, so he should be good now, but then Mahaprabhu again defeats him from the other side. So like this, Nimai becomes a great scholar. Why does he have to become a scholar? Because ultimately Nimai or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wants to show that you can learn all the knowledge in the world, but all the knowledge in the world doesn't satisfy the heart. Bahu Shastra, Bahu Vakya, Chitte Brahma hoy, Sadhya Sadhana Shreshta, Na hoy Nishchoy. You can study so many shastras, you can hear so many vakya, instructions, sadhya sadhana shreshta, but you will not necessarily ascertain and realize the goal of life simply by that. It requires something more. Therefore Krishna says in the Gita, Bahunam janmanamante jnanavan mam prapadyate. After many lives, if you actually become learned, not just learned in academic knowledge, but learned in devotional knowledge, then you'll realize that the goal is not knowledge, the goal is prapadyate, to surrender. Vasudeva sarvamiti, knowing Krishna to be everything. Sa mahatma sudurlabha, such a great soul is very rare. So Mahaprabhu studies and he learns all of these things. He becomes a great scholar. He defeats Digvijay Pandit, who's the greatest scholar of all time, and Mahaprabhu establishes himself as the greatest. But then what happens in the 17th chapter of the Adi Lila is that Mahaprabhu goes through a transformation. There are two main transformations that Mahaprabhu goes through in this period of his life. Does anyone know what those two transformations are? Yeah.
He's getting initiation.
Yes, he gets initiation from who? Yes, he goes to Gaya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nimai, and he goes to Gaya under the pretext of doing some ritual sacrifice for his deceased father. But when he goes there, he meets Ishvarapuri, and Ishvarapuri gives him a mantra. And Ishvarapuri looks at him and says, Murkha tumi, you're a fool. Tomar nahik Vedantadikar. You're studying Vedanta, but you have no qualification. Krishna mantra japa sada ei mantra sar. Just chant Krishna's names. This is the essence of everything. And so Mahaprabhu takes the name from Ishvarapuri and then begins to chant the name. And as he begins to chant Hare Krishna, then he goes into transcendental ecstasy. So much so that he comes back to Ishvarapuri and he says, Kiba mantra dila gosai, kiba tarabal. What kind of mantra have you given me, O Gosai, O spiritual teacher? Japite japite mantra, I'm chanting this mantra again and again. Korite pagal, and I'm becoming completely mad. And Ishvarapuri says, very good. That is the purpose of this mantra, that you go completely mad. And then Ishvarapuri said, I'll teach you a verse. This verse is the essence of Bhagavatam. So if I asked you now today, what verse is the essence of Bhagavatam? You could quote many verses. But this is the verse that Ishvarapuri said to Mahaprabhu that is the essence of the Bhagavatam. Evam vratasva priyanama kirtya jatanurago drita chitta uchche hasatyati roditi rodikayati unmadavan rityati lokabayaha. Ishvarapuri looked at Mahaprabhu and he said, this verse is the essence of Bhagavatam. And what does the verse say? Evam vratasva priyanama kirtya. When you take the name of Krishna and with a strong vow say, I chant this name, Jatan urago drutachitta uche, immediately ecstasy will begin to arise within your being. Hasatyati, you'll laugh. Roditi, you'll cry. Unmadavan nityati, you'll start to dance, completely indifferent to how the world is viewing you. And in this way you'll become completely mad. So this is the goal of Bhagavatam, that you laugh, you cry, you dance in ecstasy, completely oblivious to everything else. And in this way you become mad after Krishna. And so Mahaprabhu goes through this transformation, and then he comes immediately when he receives the mantra, then in his mind he thinks, now I will just go to Vrindavan. But then a voice comes from the sky. A voice comes from the sky and has to remind Mahaprabhu, you're God and you have a job. So he goes, you can't go to Vrindavan, you have to go back to Navadvip. And in Navadvip, you have to now share this wealth. Golokera Prema Dhan Harinam Sankirtan. This wealth of love has descended from Goloka and is awakened within you. And now you are the qualified one to give it to others. So Mahaprabhu comes back to Navadvip and he becomes the carrier of Harinam Sankirtan. When Mahaprabhu comes back to Navadvip, then what happens is all of the, Advaita Acharya is already there. Srivas Thakur is already there. Gadada Pandit is already there. The only person who's not there is Nityananda. So Nityananda hears in the grapevine that, oh, Mahaprabhu has come to Navadvip and he's become a great devotee. So Nityananda comes, and then Nityananda finally makes up the Panchatattva, and there the Panchatattva basically inundate the whole of Navadvip with love of Godhead. Patra patra vichar nahi nahi stan astan, je jane paye tane kare prema dhan. They never consider this person is qualified, this person isn't. This is a good place, this is a bad place. Je jane paye tane kare prema dhan. Wherever they go, they just give love. And they just give the wealth of Harinam Sankirtan. And so like this, the Panchatattva inundate Navadvip with Harinam Sankirtan. But Mahaprabhu is not satisfied. Priti Vityachayata Nagaradi Gram Sarvatra Prachara Hoibe Moranam. His vision is that in every town and village my name should be heard. And therefore Mahaprabhu decides to undergo another transformation. Another transformation in order to spread the Sankirtan movement even further. And what is that transformation? Yes.
He did say what you did a few weeks ago.
Oh yeah, he did. Yes, yes. Yes, Mahaprabhu decides to take sannyas. He says, I give up the relatively small world of family life in order to embrace the whole world as my family. Sachimata is besides herself in lamentation. My Nimai, he will now leave. Mahaprabhu says to her, isn't it the duty of a son that when a son grows up, then he has to leave home, earn the wealth, and then bring the wealth back home? Sachimata says, yes. So he says, so I will leave home and I will earn the wealth of Prema Dhan, and then I will come back and bestow that upon you. So like this, Mahaprabhu leaves. You can go today to Mayapur. There's a place called Nidaya Ghat. And it's the place where Mahaprabhu in the middle of the night jumped into the Ganga and swam downstream and went up to Katwa to meet Keshav Bharati to then take sannyas. So at the age of 24, Mahaprabhu takes sannyas, and in this way the Adi Lila concludes. So basically the Adi Lila is dealing with the first 24 years of Mahaprabhu's life, 0 to 24. The Madhya-Lila is dealing with Mahaprabhu's life from 24 to 32. And Antya-Lila is dealing with Mahaprabhu's life from 32 to 48, like that. So this is basically the Adi Lila. And now you can see why primarily the Adi Lila is focused on Sambandha, because it's giving you an understanding of the identity of Mahaprabhu and the identity of all of his associates. Let me just stop there and see whether anyone has any question before I move on. Anyone have any question on Adi Lila or anything I've mentioned so far? Yes.
You said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Gaya to sacrifice for his deceased father, but isn't
Deceased.
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 Yeah, his father's passed away.
Oh,
Yes.
Sorry.
Is that what you're going to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, his father had passed away. Jagannath Mishra. It said that there are different reasons why Jagannath Mishra passed away, but one was that it said that Sachimata had lost, isn't it, 8 daughters immediately when they were born, they had died. And then after all going through all of that, she finally had a son, Vishvarup. But then Vishvarup took sannyas. And so Jagannath Mishra was thinking, I've lost 8 daughters, my other son has already taken sannyas, and now I have Nimai. But Nimai, he's going to hear from Advaita Acharya every day the same thing what Vishvarup was doing. And when a young person hears transcendental knowledge, then there's a good chance that renunciation may awaken within them. So he said that Jagannath Mishra, just the fear that Mahaprabhu may leave, the fear of impending separation. Rupa Goswami explains there's 4 kinds of separation. And one of the separation is called prema vaichitya. It means it's a separation that you feel even when you're in association of someone, that you feel there may be an impending separation in the future. So sometimes Radharani and Krishna are together, but even while they're together, they're feeling separation because there's an impending separation. So it said that because of the impending separation that Jagannath Mishra felt could arise, he couldn't maintain his life. And that was one of the reasons given why he left his body. Yes.
In this chapter, Chaitanya's tree, where all the different branches are described, I remember it was so long and no taste. Maybe put in the right context how to develop some taste in reading such chapters.
Yes. What we have to also realize is that Caitanya Caritamrta was not just a book which was meant to give beautiful pastimes of Mahaprabhu. That was perhaps the prime reason. But Caitanya Caritamrta was also a book written by Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami to basically draw boundaries around the Gaudiya Sampradaya. You understand? The Caitanya Caritamrita was a book which would establish the Gaudiya Sampradaya and explain who are the real followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and who will continue this tradition for many hundreds of years to come. So also the Caitanya Caritamrita, along with being a book of Leela, is also a historical book which is meant to secure the position of the Sampradaya and draw boundaries around the Sampradaya. And therefore you find in these chapters, the reason that so many names are given and so many lineages are given is so that at that time in Bengal and for generations to come, people would be able to have a reference point, who is actually in the Gaudiya Sampradaya and where can I trace my roots back to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to Advaita Acharya, to Nityananda. So one purpose of the Caitanya Caritamrita is also meant to be a historical book of reference. But how to have taste when you're reading these chapters? The way to have taste is to learn about who all these personalities are. Because if you learn about who these personalities are, then just by hearing their name, you sometimes hear in Bhagavatam, you know, that someone just hears someone's name. And just by hearing their name, they go into ecstasy. And you think like, wow, is the name really that ecstatic? But the name, Nama, Guna, Rupa, Lila. Nama is like a trigger. And what does Nama trigger? The Guna, the qualities of that person. And what does that trigger? Rupa, the form of that person. And what does that trigger? Leela, the pastimes of that person. And so if we actually learn about all of these personalities, then what will happen is when you hear a name, Ramachandra Kaviraj, oh wow, Ramachandra Kaviraj, it will trigger so many things within you. So like this, our spiritual practice goes deeper when we internalize. Like say for example, Mangalarti. In the beginning, Mangalarti is just about somehow or other trying to learn the words. So that's stage one, learn the words of Mangalarti. But then it goes little deeper when you actually understand the English translation. Jai Shri Shri Gaura Nitai ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai. Or the German translation, or whatever it may be. One time we did a test, a spot test in the Brahmacharya ashram to find out who actually knew what they were singing. And I tell you, the results were not good. Right? So it goes deeper. First you learn the words. That in itself is purifying. But it's even deeper when you know the meaning behind the words. Okay, samsara da, there's a blazing forest fire. You can meditate on it. But then it goes even deeper when you know something about the person who wrote the song. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, oh, he wrote the song. And oh, Vishwanath, and he did this, and this was his relationship with Baladev Vidyabhusan, and then it becomes even deeper if you actually go to Vrindavan and go to the Radha Gokulananda temple, and then in the courtyard go to the Samadhi of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So you see, then when you're in Mangalarti, you're not just, there's a compounding meditation because of the depth with which you've built up your understanding of that thing. So it's like that. When you hear the name of these personalities, it can trigger so much according to how much you've explored. Okay, let me continue on because otherwise we won't get through it. So now Adi Leela is done, Mahaprabhu's taken sannyas. Again, when Mahaprabhu takes sannyas, then he thinks, I just want to go to Vrindavan. And at that time, Nityananda says, yeah, no problem, I'll take you to Vrindavan. But Nityananda Prabhu is very, very merciful. He knows the pain that the Navadvip residents have gone through, knowing that their darling Nimai has taken sannyas. And so he thinks, I got to give them one more opportunity to see Nimai. And so he thinks, I will misdirect Mahaprabhu in his ecstasy. I'll pretend to take him to Vrindavan, but actually I'll take him to Shantipur. And so they go to Shantipur, and the message is given to all the residents of Navadvip that Nimai has taken sannyas, and now as a sannyasi he's going to appear in Shantipur. And so Mahaprabhu comes there, and all the residents of Navadvip come there. And then in that procession coming from Navadvip, Sachimata also comes. So Sachimata sees her son as a sannyasi for the first time. You can imagine what she's feeling. And then she says, I have only 2 wishes. My first wish is that while you are here for 10 days, only I can cook for you. Interesting. That's out of all the things you could ask, that's what she asks for. So she cooks for Mahaprabhu for those 10 days. And Prabhupada said you have to have the courage of an English soldier and the love of a Bengali mother. So she had that love of a Bengali mother. And then she said, my second wish is that if you go to Vrindavan now, I will never hear anything about you. But if you take up residence in Puri, then I may not be able to see you, but at least I will get regular news of you, because Jagannath Puri and Navadvip are like 2 rooms in the same house. And so Mahaprabhu says, how can I refuse? So these first 6 chapters, we call them renunciation, because they're the first years of Mahaprabhu's life, or the first months, not years, months of Mahaprabhu's life as a renunciate. And as he journeys towards Jagannath Puri, then eventually he arrives in Jagannath Puri, and he makes Jagannath Puri his base as a sannyasi. And in Jagannath Puri he converts Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Sarvabhauma looks at Mahaprabhu and he says, you're young, you're beautiful, you're learned, you have all good qualities, and you've taken this life of renunciation. How you will be able to maintain it? You have to learn Vedanta, you have to learn philosophy, otherwise you won't be able to sustain your renunciation. And so he speaks for 7 days, And then Mahaprabhu actually teaches him and says, you said so many things, but actually you covered the real meaning. Let me tell you the real meaning. And so these first 6 chapters are about Mahaprabhu's early months as a renunciate. But when you take sannyas, when you renounce, then it's the dharma of a sannyasi to travel. One devotee once said to Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, I just want to stay rooted at your lotus feet. Prabhupada said it will be very difficult because I'm always moving. So Prabhupada was always moving. In fact, it said that Jayapataka Maharaj went down in the Guinness Book of Records. 1 year he took something like 180 flights in a year. An average of 1 flight every 2.5 days or something. That's a lot of traveling. So Mahaprabhu decides, I have to travel, I have to preach. That is my dharma. And therefore, in the chapters numbers 7 to 15, we call them propagation, because Mahaprabhu is now traveling to South India. For 2 years, Mahaprabhu travels all the way through South India. That journey is 4,000 miles, and he walks that journey in 2 years, traveling village to village, place to place, person to person, sharing knowledge, having all these amazing conversations with Ramananda Rai, with Vyankatabhatta. And then finally, after 2 years, Mahaprabhu comes back to Jagannath Puri, and then in Jagannath Puri, Mahaprabhu propagates the holy name at the biggest festival in the world. There's no festival in the world like this, so big. Jagannath Puri Rath Yatra. Even now, they just had Puri Rath Yatra. It's said that in Puri Rath Yatra, about 1.5 million people come for that festival. The biggest gathering of people for a one-day festival on the entire earth planet. So Mahaprabhu decides that would be a good place to propagate the holy name. And so Mahaprabhu experiences the ecstasy at Rath Yatra and shares that love in front of Jagannath. And then, after propagating, Mahaprabhu fulfills an aspiration that he's had for a long time. He decided he wanted to go to Vrindavan many times, but he failed. And so finally now, he decides, I will go to Vrindavan and I will just take one person with me, Balabhadra Bhattacharya. And in this way Mahaprabhu travels and he goes through the Jarikanda forest and he makes all the animals dance in ecstasy. That is the influence of a spiritual person, that wherever they go, they bring everyone together. A spiritual personality, isn't it? Bhavananda Prabhu, he had gone to a Navadvip astrologer and he had showed him Prabhupada's horoscope. And the astrologer looked at him and said, this man has the power to build a house in which the whole world can live very peacefully. And Bhavananda Prabhu came back and he said, Prabhupada, I just went to the astrologer and the astrologer said this. And Prabhupada said, yes, that is a fact. So that's the effect of a spiritual personality, that they're able to bring everyone together in a society of non-envy. So Mahaprabhu does that through the Jarikanda forest, and then finally he arrives in Vrindavan, and then he does a parikrama of Vrindavan. So if you do today, if you go for Vrajamandala parikrama, then basically what we're doing on Vrajamandala parikrama in Kartik is we're following the exact route that Mahaprabhu also took when he went to Vrindavan. So Mahaprabhu goes to Vrindavan, and then after coming back from Vrindavan, so if you know the map of India, Vrindavan is kind of here, Puri is here. I'm doing it from your side. And then if you stop, there's 2 places that Mahaprabhu stops on the way from Vrindavan to Puri. One place he stops is Varanasi, and the other place he stops is Allahabad or Prayag. And in Varanasi, Mahaprabhu stops for 2 months and instructs Sanatana Goswami. And in Prayag, Allahabad, Mahaprabhu stops for 10 days and instructs Rupa Goswami. And this is all documented in chapters 19 to 25, and we call this organization. Because what Mahaprabhu does in these chapters is he gives all of the knowledge to Rupa and Sanatan about the science of bhakti. He instructs them about all the different aspects of bhakti, because Mahaprabhu never writes any books. Mahaprabhu never writes anything for himself, but he does all of his organization of the movement through the Goswamis of Vrindavan. And then what does Mahaprabhu do to the Goswamis after instructing them in all this beautiful knowledge? He gives them further instructions. Bhakti Bhakti Krishna Prem Tatvera Nidhar Vaishnavera Kritya Aur Vaishnava Achar Krishna Bhakti Krishna Prema Seva Pravartan Lupta Tirtha Udara Ar Vairagya Shikshan. The first instruction he gives to the Goswamis is that you should write books. Second instruction, Vaishnavera Kritya Ar Vaishnava Achar, teach people how a Vaishnav should behave. Lupta Tirtha, excavate the holy places. Seva Pravartan, make temples where people can come and worship the Supreme Lord. Vairagya Shikshan, show the ideal example of how a renunciate should live. And so in this way, in these chapters, Mahaprabhu organizes the knowledge, organizes the movement by instructing the Goswamis of Vrindavan. And in this way, the Madhya-Lila ends. Any questions on the Madhya-Lila or anything I've said in this section? No? Okay. So then Mahaprabhu, now he comes back to Jagannath Puri. Now Mahaprabhu has traveled. He's traveled across South India. He's traveled to Vrindavan. He's traveled to many places. Now Mahaprabhu comes back to Vrindavan, Jagannath Puri at the age of 32, and he never leaves. He never leaves now. For these 18 years, he will stay only in Jagannath Puri. And what Mahaprabhu does for the first 6 of those final 18 years is he teaches Vaishnav culture and Vaishnav etiquette. So what he does is he shows appreciation for many devotees, and he also offers correction to many devotees. This is in the first 13 chapters of the Antya-Lila. So for example, Mahaprabhu appreciates Rupa Goswami for his incredible humility. Mahaprabhu appreciates Sanatana Goswami for his incredible exhibition of Vaishnav culture. Mahaprabhu appreciates Raghunath Das Goswami for his unparalleled level of renunciation. So like this, Mahaprabhu appreciates many, many devotees, and through his appreciation for them shows us what kind of culture and etiquette we should have if we really want to awaken Krishna Prem within ourselves. But then what he also does is he corrects many devotees. Chota Haridas has inappropriate connections with the opposite gender. Mahaprabhu corrects him. Pradyumna Mishra is judging people on the externals, so Mahaprabhu corrects him. The Bengali poet offers some poetry to Mahaprabhu but is tinged with Mayavad. Mahaprabhu corrects him. So through different other interactions, Mahaprabhu corrects devotees, showing Ramachandra Puri is very critical of Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu, through others, corrects him. So therefore, Mahaprabhu shows what kind of culture we should have and what kind of culture we shouldn't have. What kind of qualities we should nurture and what kind of qualities we should try to take out of our character. And then after doing this, then in chapters 14 to 19, Mahaprabhu goes into intoxication. So now Mahaprabhu has spread Harinam Sankirtan, he's given all the knowledge, he's shown Vaishnav culture and etiquette. Now Mahaprabhu goes into the Gambhira and he doesn't do anything else except with his close associates, Ramananda Rai, Swarup Damodar. He just hears about the pastimes of Radha and Krishna and goes deeply into his internal purpose, which is to experience the love of Srimati Radharani. Radha Bhava Dyuti Suvalitam Krishna Nomi Swarupam. He's come in the Radha Bhav, so now he wants to experience Radha Bhav. So Mahaprabhu goes into the Gambhira and he goes into divine madness, intoxication, and all of his senses become conquered by Krishna. Conquered by ecstatic love. And like this, Mahaprabhu shows the highest peak of love. And then finally, in the final chapter of the Antya-Lila, which is known as Shikshashtakam, then Mahaprabhu gives his final instructions. Everything that Mahaprabhu wants to teach the world, summarized in 8 verses. And this is how the Caitanya Caritamrta ends. So if you want to know the whole journey of the Caitanya Caritamrta, is very simple. Invocation, incarnation, education, transformation, renunciation, propagation, aspiration, organization, appreciation, correction, intoxication, instruction. And like this, if you understand this overview of the Caitanya Caritamrta, whenever you, like now you're reading from the 21st chapter of the Caitanya Caritamrita as Mahaprabhu instructs Sanatana Goswami, then you will be able to understand immediately, oh, that's the part of the Caitanya Caritamrita we're in, and you'll be able to contextualize the verse, and it will allow you to gain deeper entrance into the wonderful narrations of the Caitanya Caritamrita. So this, in a nutshell, is a complete overview of the CC as given to us by Srila Prabhupada. And Caitanya Caritamrita is known to be the final word. After Caitanya Caritamrita, there is no other book which contains any higher theology, any higher revelation of reality than what has been revealed in Caitanya Caritamrita. One person, he says, if you find a theology where the devotee cries for God, then you have to understand this is a very deep theology. But if you find a theology where God cries for his devotee, then you have to understand this is even more advanced. But if you find a theology where God becomes a devotee so he can cry for himself, then you have to understand this theology is off the scale. Like this is, so you will not find this kind of theology anywhere in the world. This is only found in Caitanya Caritamrita, and therefore is known to be the final word. Prabhupada said it's the postgraduate study in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So the deepest truths are revealed there, and this has been given to us by Srila Prabhupada. So sometimes we may not even be aware of the depth of what we've been given. This is a unique revelation to the world. Hare Krishna. Okay, I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to ask on Caitanya Caritamrita, on any of these points, or any aspect of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in general, then we can we have some few minutes, we can have some discussion if anyone has.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for this overview. I had two questions, one indirectly related and one directly related. And because you mentioned this pastime of Ramachandra Puri, I haven't read this part directly, but I heard the audiobook. And I often wondered, maybe there are parts that I missed, that Lord Chaitanya was very patient and kind towards Ramachandra Puri, because he was very blasphemous, not only towards Lord Chaitanya, but also other devotees. And then for me, just to understand why, I mean, in one aspect I understand that Lord Chaitanya was displaying this humility that he had. But at the same time, Ramachandra Puri was also quite famous for criticizing other devotees. And we see that Lord Chaitanya even reprimanded his mother when she criticized Advaita Acharya. So how should we understand the Lord's patience with Ramachandra Puri?
Yes, good question. Remember, A Mata Bhakta Bhav Koriyangikar Apaniya Chari Bhakti Korila Prachar. Mahaprabhu is saying, I'm coming in the Bhakta Bhav. I'm coming as a devotee, Apaniya Chari Bhakti, and through my behavior, I'm going to teach the whole world how to be a devotee. What Mahaprabhu is basically teaching is that when a devotee themselves are criticized, then the devotee will never retaliate or never defend themselves. But when another devotee is criticized, then the devotee becomes very angry. So, yes, when Advaita Acharya was criticized by Sachimata, because Sachimata said, your name is Advaita, non-dual, but you are Dvaita, you are duplicitous, because you are breaking families. You induced my son to take sannyas, and now my other son will also take sannyas because of you. And because of that statement, Mahaprabhu said, no, that is wrong, you have to beg for forgiveness. When Jagadananda tried to instruct Sanatan Goswami had sores all over his body, and when he was in Jagannath Puri, Mahaprabhu loved him so much that Mahaprabhu had no problem embracing Sanatan Goswami, even though Sanatan Goswami's body was full of blood. Sanatan Goswami said, I can't tolerate this. And he went to Jagadananda, and Jagadananda said, yes, this is not good, you should go, you should leave Jagannath Puri. And when Mahaprabhu found out, he said, how can you tell Sanatan Goswami to leave? He is more advanced than you, don't ever try to instruct him. Mahaprabhu was very strong. So yes, Mahaprabhu was very strong when there was criticism of others. But Mahaprabhu showed the example that when a devotee themselves is criticized, they're not so eager to defend themselves. Sometimes we may have to defend ourselves if there's some purpose in service. But for a devotee's own reputation, they have no problem. And ultimately they know that Krishna will arrange everything, isn't it? Srivas Thakur was defamed by Gopal Chapal. Gopal Chapal tried to put all of this paraphernalia for worshipping Shakti outside of his home, just to try to defame him, that actually he's into intoxication, meat eating and so many things. Srivas Thakur, when he found all these items, he just said, he didn't defend himself, say, no, this was a setup. But everyone understood, no, this was Gopal Chapal's arrangement to try and defame Srivas Thakur. So Mahaprabhu, he shows that a devotee is not so worried about defending themselves. Amanina manadena, they don't have so much need to be respected. Rather ready to give respect to all others. And then ultimately we see that Krishna arranges everything. So sometimes we think we have to be the one to redress all of the injustices towards us. But sometimes a devotee also knows that Krishna is there and Krishna will redress all the injustices if he so desires. And therefore a devotee is not so eager necessarily always to defend themselves. So this is one of the lessons that we take from that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. If I may ask another question. Because when you mentioned how Lord Chaitanya instructed the Goswami with certain tasks, and we also hear about how it's empowerment also in a way. And when you were speaking about this aspect, I was reminded of how even Srila Prabhupada gave many instructions of what we should do with the movement and how far we should go. And of course, there are many aspects which we haven't fulfilled yet. And I was just thinking that, of course, there is a lack on our part. Maybe my question is not properly framed, but I'm just thinking of how Lord Chaitanya empowered the Goswamis and they went ahead and they did it. And when Srila Prabhupada said it, in a way, should we consider that also as empowerment? And if yes, then we are not able to do it. And why? Because there are certain aspects we have not fulfilled yet.
Yeah. Srila Prabhupada said the order of the spiritual master may be delayed, but it can never be denied. Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada himself received the order to spread Krishna consciousness to the Western world in 1922, but it was only 44 years later that he actually went to the Western world. So we have to understand that things also have their timeline, but it's always in a devotee's mind, it's always in a disciple's mind, it's always in a follower's mind that, there are all these instructions, and at some point I have to find a way to fulfill these instructions. So a disciple is always working on the instructions, either by directly fulfilling them or by in themselves building up a meditation and the strength in order to fulfill those instructions. But those instructions are always in the mind. And so with regards to Prabhupada's instructions, why have they not all manifested? Well, one reason could be because many of us have forgotten Srila Prabhupada's instructions. Another reason could be that Prabhupada's instructions are there, but we're now investing in ourselves to become qualified in order to then fulfill those instructions. And then the third thing could be that, yes, those instructions are being fulfilled, but we are in the very early stages and it will take a longer time still for those things to mature, just like Prabhupada was saying the other morning that for all good things it takes some time. So, instructions are there. They should never be denied, but there may sometimes be a delay in manifesting those instructions. But if we live with those instructions and we take them seriously, then we can understand the empowerment is always there. Prabhupada says in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, the spiritual master lives forever in his instructions and the follower lives with him. So while one is following Prabhupada's instructions, then one can understand Prabhupada is right there. Prabhupada is present and Prabhupada is ready to give the support and empowerment and the strength as long as those instructions stay within our heart and mind. So yes, we must keep them there, conscious of them all the time. Is that okay? Yeah. Anyone else would like to add or ask anything? Yes.
Marge, if you could just put it into perspective, like we say, CC is a postgraduate study. So the connection between Srimad Bhagavatam and CC, and then it says also through Chaitanya Mahaprabhu you attain Radha Krishna. So, like, how do we understand this practically?
How they connect.
And and what do we... Like, we cannot understand Bhagavatam without CC, but then we cannot understand CC without Bhagavatam. Like, how does it all connect?
The first thing to understand is that spiritual learning is not linear. Spiritual learning is like a spiral. So in the material world, learning is like this. It's like linear. You learn that book, then you learn that book, then you learn that book. And once you're on those books no longer matter. But in spiritual life, learning is like a spiral. So you go around the same books again and again. And what happens is by studying those same books again and again, you actually eventually get to the essence of it all. So, when we say that Gita is the foundation, Bhagavatam is the graduate, and CC is the postgraduate, we're not saying that in a linear way. We're saying that that's the general way in which you should be introduced to those literatures. But later on, once you read Caitanya Caritamrta, then you'll be able to come back to the Gita, come back to the Bhagavatam and understand it in a deeper way. And then after understanding the Bhagavatam and Gita in a deeper way, by the mercy of Caitanya Caritamrta, you'll be able to then come back to the Caitanya Caritamrta and understand it in an even deeper way. So it's like a spiral. So, but we do see that there is a progression. The Bhagavad Gita are the words of Krishna. The Bhagavatam are the activities of Krishna. But the Caitanya Caritamrta is the mind of Krishna. Right? When Ramananda Rai is speaking with Mahaprabhu, Ramananda Rai is saying that you are revealing your mind to me, and I am like an instrument saying what your mind is to the whole world. So it reveals the mind of God. So if you look, there is a progression. The Gita begins, Dehinosmin, you're not the body. And how does the Gita end? Sarva dharman parityaja, give up all religion. So how does the Bhagavatam begin? Dharma projita ketavo. This Bhagavatam throws out all the cheating religion. Where Gita ended, that's where Bhagavatam begins. And how does Bhagavatam end? The final verse, Nam Sankirtanam Yasya Sarva Papa Pranasham. Just chant Krishna's names. So then, that's where the Bhagavatam ends, by putting the focus on Nam Sankirtan. So where does Caitanya Caritamrta begin? Mahaprabhu says, Bhakta Bhava Angikar Apani Achari Bhakti Korila Prachar. I'll teach people how to chant the holy name by chanting the holy name myself. And then how does CC end? Japite japite mantra korite pagal. I'm becoming completely mad. So that's basically the journey of spiritual life. The first day you enter a Hare Krishna temple and they tell you're not the body, you're the soul. But you may not be aware that's just the first step in the journey. Where that journey ends is that you become completely mad after. That's how these literatures are taking you on that journey. But then but it all supports each other. In the Caitanya Caritamrta, there's a verse which says, Krishna's Leela is like sandalwood, and Mahaprabhu's Leela is like camphor. And when they come together, the fragrance is unlimitedly expanded. So it's like that. We read Caitanya Caritamrta and then we come back to the Bhagavatam and understand it in a deeper way. And then we go back and understand it like that. So they support and augment like a spiral. We go round and round, not like a linear. We leave back the... Therefore even Gadada Pandit in Jagannath Puri, what is he reading every day? The pastimes of Dhruva and the pastimes of Prahlad, again and again. Not Rasa Lila, not Chaitanya Lila, no, Dhruva and Prahlad. Because you can understand those Leelas in a deeper way after having understood such things. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
Can I just
Yeah.
Just, I always I'm a little confused of when we speak of only through Gaura we come to Radha Krishna. What does it actually mean? Does it just mean we follow the instruction of chanting Hare Krishna, or just because they...
Yeah, Prabodhananda Saraswati says that, Yatha Yatha